Welcome to my third video on the Volca Modular. In the first, we answered the question, can a Volca Modular sound like a real instrument? And yes, there were people who actually said, but the Volca Modular is a real instrument. Yes, I think we actually meant sound like a non-electronic instrument, and hopefully the answer was yes. The second video was all about, can the Volca Modular sound like a conventional synthesizer, one that you're probably more used to? And hopefully the answer for that was also yes. In the third one, that's a bit of a cheeky title, Volca Modular, the clue is in the name. So hopefully you've guessed we're going to be talking about modular synths. So the Volca Modular, well, technically it's a semi-modular, not modular synth. The difference being a modular has no connections. There are modules, you must connect them together to make any form of sound. The Volca Modular is semi-modular, meaning it has some of the connections already made for you, but what you can do is you can break them and change them. So we have our source section. If you follow the line goes to our low pass gate, the input, the output from our function generator, which is now used as an envelope, goes to the volume or the middle pin of the low pass gate, and the low pass gate goes out to our space out. So when we press the notes, with no wires, no connections, uses the internal connections to make a sound. But the beauty about modular is we can break those connections and change the order and change what we do. So first of all, what modules have we got? We've got a source, which you saw in the second video. You can change frequency modulation and folding to get various different, very complicated sounds. We have two function generators. The first looks more like a conventional attack release, like an envelope. The second is a generic shape, so you can change it from sawtooth to ramp to triangle. The third and fourth, you've got low pass gates, two of them, dual low pass gates, very useful. You've also got a math section, A plus or minus B times C, so you can change the level, you can change the volume, or you can attenuate. You can even do some the fancy stuff we'll get to in a bit. The reverb, well, pretty much it's just a reverb. You've also got sample and hold, which calls woggle, and we've got a splitter and a mixer. So we've actually got a fair few modules, and the beauty is most of these modules can do more than one thing. So they're not just stuck doing their own thing. So first of all, what we're going to do is have a look. It's modular, you've got wires, so you see all these little tiny connections. Every one of those connections controls something, and every one has a default, or maybe nothing connected into it, but it has a default potential. You can change what that does by just putting a wire in there. So, for example, the source section, you can control the pitch, you can control the ratio, the fold, the mod, and you have outputs for the first and second oscillators. Things in white are normally inputs, things in the blue or black are outputs. So the first function generator, you've got a gate. In other words, when you push a key down, you can control the attack, the release. You've got an output of plus. In other words, as the voltage comes up, the signal goes up like that and down. You've got negative, which is the opposite. So it starts high and goes low, then high again. And then you've got a trigger, so when you let go the gate, it triggers itself, or it sends a trigger signal. The second function is very similar. You have a trigger to start it, you can control the shape, the time, and then you've got the same output. So plus, so as the signal goes up, so does the voltage. You've got a minus, so it does the opposite, and you've got an end of cycle. So this one here doesn't have a gate. In other words, this will stay high while you keep the voltage up. This one just has a trigger, and when the whole cycle's finished, it sends a pulse out the trigger. Your low pass gates have an input, that's where your signal goes in. I call this a volume, but basically that's your voltage controlled amplifier and cutoff. And then they have the output. The math section we've already said, A plus B times C, or A minus B times C. The woggle, you've got a clock, input with noise, and two outputs, and the splitter you've got two inputs and four outputs. So let's have a look. Now, we won't go too much into the source. We'll take it that you've seen the previous video, and so you can see how we can get sounds like sawtooth-like and square. You can get some quite interesting harmonics using the fold. So we'll go straight to the first function generator. Now, normally, well, in the normal connection, that's our envelope. So yeah, you can turn up the attack. Takes a while, turn up the delay or release, and it holds the note. That's pretty usual. But it can do a couple of other things. You can, for example, create a square wave. Now what we're going to do first of all, we're going to actually jump straight to our maths unit. So we can use this just temporarily, just to help us demonstrate things. So A plus B times C. With no wire in, A is 0. With no wire in, B is 1 or high, and C is whatever you twist. So A plus B times C is going to be 1 times C, which is basically C. So that's like a voltage source. I'm going to plug the volume of the low pass gate into that source, and the reason I'm going to do that is I can now control the volume with this. You may ask why. Well, basically, I'm going to show you the secondary function, or one of the secondary functions of function 1. So I can take, let's take the lower, the modulating oscillator, because it's low. It always sounds nicer. If we put that into the gate, so what's going to happen is, every time the signal goes positive, it triggers this gate. Every time it goes negative, it stops, and we actually get an end of gate signal. So as the wave goes up and down, this is going to go from positive to negative, positive, negative. So that's our square wave. So if we plug, oh, not there, plug it into there, turn up our volume, there's a square. Oops, somehow I managed to turn on the... Right, and it sounds a bit strange because obviously we're not using a proper envelope, but there's a square wave. So that's a secondary option. And the other thing you can do with this is, again, we have all the controls. We can do something quite fun, and that is if I take the control for the release and I feed that the negative. So basically what's going to happen is, when I'm not touching anything, it's very high. As the voltage comes up, the negative goes down. So a high voltage means a quick release. A low voltage means a slow release. So what's going to happen is, don't know if you can hear it, but the moment I take my finger off, it immediately drops down, and then it basically tails off. So let's put it up a bit louder. Make sure this. So it's almost like a sustain level on, yeah, a more traditional synthesizer. There's another one. For example, we can actually use the positive instead of negative. Now what's going to happen here is, it starts off, as it's going, it starts off slowly and then picks up. So we're going to have a delay. When we take our finger off, it'll hold for a while and then quite sharply cut off. So here how it holds for a while and then cuts off. It doesn't, for example, the opposite. You can hear how it just smoothly goes away. By changing that, we can change the envelope. Anyway, so that's a couple of uses for the first one. The second function generator, we've used it in pretty much every video. It has possibly two main uses. One is an LFO, and that's simple. You can plug the end of cycle into the beginning of cycle, and let's just hear it. So we can put the output of that straight into the output of the space reverb. Again, because we're modular, we can do this sort of thing. And I can now, you can hear the clicks. If I change change the shape, there's a certain point at which it becomes a triangle wave, which is actually the quickest, but I can get audio frequency out of it. And in fact, we are a modular synth, so we have control of everything. What we can do is, in fact, that time, so that's the time one up there, I can put into, remember the trick with the math section? Well, I put -C, because the lower the voltage, the higher it gets. So I can put it to some sort of saw. We can get various different sounds. Obviously you can use that to go up and down. You can make pitches go up and down, but that just shows you controlling that. Now you can also do as a one shot, and we'll give an example of that in a bit. But if you, instead of looping it, you can put the gate into the trigger, and then it will just trigger it once. And so you can do something, you can use that to create a punch at the start, or you can make it at the end. But basically this is a very, very useful shape, because you can make it ramp, sawtooth, or triangle. Okay, the math section. Now we've seen the useful ones. We've seen it act as a voltage source with nothing in there. We've seen it act as an attenuator. So we can put a signal in there and make it louder and softer. For example, we've got our normal triangle. We can also do something like this. What if we were to also trigger the second gate with the same envelope? That's the plus. So follow the wire. And this time we're going to add the second oscillator. So here there's two. So two oscillators. So we've got each oscillator going through a different low pass gate, and both of them go to the space out. But we say, okay, that's really nice, but we lost the top because that's too loud. So what we can do is, instead of putting that straight in there, we can put it into B. Remember, A defaults to 0, B defaults to, well, defaults to a 1 or a high, but we're putting something in B. So the answer, we're going to get B times C. So we can make it less than 1, or basically attenuate it. So if we put it all the way to the left, there's our normal sound. I can just... So we only get a small amount. I can turn it all the way up. And you get much more. So that's an attenuator. You can change the volume. Now, while we are on the low-pass gates, we can actually do something a bit different. Low-pass gates are a combination of a filter and an amplifier. So if I was to play a note and twist the filter, you can hear it cutting back until we end up with something that sounds a bit like a sine wave and eventually just disappears. So what this knob does is it gives us the maximum filter. And then our envelope, so if I turn the envelope right up to make it slow, even though the volume gets high, the amount of cutoff is limited by what we twist here. So it's still the same volume, just a different sound. But something else we can do, we don't have to use a slow envelope. We can actually modulate these at audio frequency. Now what we mean by that is, instead of having our envelope go there, I'm going to keep the oscillator there, but I'm going to put the volume on that same oscillator. Now, of course, what we've immediately found is we no longer get a volume type effect, because we've now used that low pass gate as an amplitude modulator. So we can take the output of that to the input of the next gate, take the volume of that gate and also feed it to the envelope, and then take the output, because that's normally going from this one. So if we take the output here, put that into the input, we've lost the sound because this is now acting as our gate. We'll turn this. Now, I don't know if you can hear it, but that's a very different sound. When you have two triangle waves in amplitude modulation, instead of getting a nice triangle shape, it ends up looking like a shark's tooth because it starts off slowly and gets higher and faster. So you end up with these little things that look again like shark's teeth. Much buzzier, more saw wave. So put a bit of reverb. Anyway, so that's the use. That's the low pass gate acting as an amplitude modulator. Now, luckily we've got two gates because we can still use one as a VCA and the other as an amplitude modulator. Now, the other thing we can of course do is use our math section. So instead of getting the value from the oscillator straight in, what we can do is put it down here. But instead of making it variable, what we want to do now is use the math section as a level shifter. And what we mean by that is if you imagine a wave, we're just moving it up and down. Now there'll be a point where we get so high a voltage that it can't go any higher and it flattens out. So what we can do, if we put the value into A, now we'll leave B empty and C, so that's going to be A plus or minus B times C. So I'm now going to take where we had our amplitude modulation, I'm going to take that A plus B times C. So if we twist, so what's happening is when I get it all the way around there, it's shifting the wave so high that it's basically acting like it's always on. So this part here is really, it's not really doing anything. And if I turn it down, it becomes more and more shark tooth-like. Very much like a sweep, isn't it? Now, again, we are modular, so maybe what we want to do is we want to modify that. So I can take the B, and let's put it into the minus sign. Now we already know that the minus, when I have my finger down, it goes 0. So let's give ourselves, just to show what it sounds like, lots of attack and decay. And you hear as I release and press, it changes like a sweep. And you can even see the LED of the first LPG getting brighter and darker. Now, we can do things like change the filter slightly. Let's see. So there we are. So we've amplitude modulated our own signal. We've changed the level to get a different level of amplitude modulation. We've married it from the envelope. We've put it into the second low pass gate and out. And we can use the second one again to change. So we make it a bit more mellow. That's like acting like our normal low pass gate. This is our amplitude modulator, turning it into a shark tooth. And again, very different sound. All right. Now we're going to use something that's quite strange. Amplitude modulation, what it actually does is it takes your normal frequency and it also gives you the difference and addition of the second frequency. So you end up with 3 notes, if you like to put it that way. What we're about to do now is called ring modulation. Because we've got B times C, ring modulator is just multiplying 2 signals. So our math section can actually act. as a ring modulator. Now, everyone's heard a ring modulator, and if you don't remember or don't know, basically all the 1960s science fiction type sounds were all pretty much ring modulator. Everything from the Daleks' voices to, well, I'll show you, it's phaser sounds. So basically, if we take, so into our source, A plus B times C, A is 0, so it's just B times C. I'm going to turn it all out because I want the whole of B times C. Maybe I'll turn the attack just for now. Make sure there's nothing else, make sure these are all turned up. So, maybe a bit loud. Now I can change the ratio and listen what happens. See, very 1960s. Now, of course, you can have a play with this. We have, as we're a modular, we can control things. So here's our attack and decay. So what would happen if I took the positive, went to the ratio? Now I'm going to give a bit of delay. So you can hear that's a ring modulator sound. So basically we're taking our envelope, and as it decays down, we're changing the value of the pitch. I can change that. You've got the starts for like a Doctor Who. All right, what else could you do? Okay, we don't want to sound like a phaser or a Doctor Who. So one good thing, ring modulators are particularly good at sounding like a metallic, like a cymbal or a steel drum or something like that. So what we'll do is we'll set it to 1 to 1. Now, by the way, you can hear the when you're very close, the difference is very, very low. So if you just listen to see if you can hear the very low pitch noise. See, it's higher as we get closer. We get that sort of cymbal-like sound. Now we can obviously do something like add a little bit of delay. Already sounding fairly good. But again, we're a modular device and we're an additive synth. Let's do something. We want a bit of punch at the beginning. If you're a steel drum, you'd normally have a beat of the, when the gong hits the drum. So what we can do, we can use our second function generator. We'll gate it. So when we press a key, it'll start up. We'll take the result of that, the positive, put it into the fold. See, it already sounds, you can hear that at the beginning. See the LED flicks on? That's too fast though, so let's put it down an octave. We can play with the attack and release, and maybe just filter just a little bit to get rid of some of the buzziness. Yeah, maybe up an octave. Yeah, so there's a steel drum from a ring modulator and using the fold to add that extra oomph at the beginning. See, that's why modular is wonderful. Alright, we've only got 2 more to go. Trying to keep this video as short as possible, and as normal, in case I hadn't already said it, this is one take and you're hearing what I hear, so it's going straight through the speakers. That's all we hear. So sample and hold. what's happening with sample and hold is every time we gate, and the gate is taken from our key press, we take whatever's in that input, the white one, and we lock it. We store that value and output it. That's the one up the top. The next thing is we can take the previous value and we can slide, so we can glide between them. So for example, let's also check, our default is what's called pink noise. Now pink noise, like white noise is that hissing sound, pink noise is a lot lower frequency. It's not as pleasant, but it gives us a good random source. I can take, again, we're a modular synth, I can reprogram it. I will take the noise, which is both an input and output, and that's pink noise. Really not very pleasant, but it's good for random sources. So I can take the clocked noise, the output, the top right, and put that into the pitch. When I press a key, you see every time I press a key, the notes change, the LEDs change, and we end up, yeah. So we get that random R2DT. I mean, that didn't sound like R2DT, but you get the idea. Get those random notes. They can be used anywhere on the synth. So for example, if you have a patch running, or you know, have your sequence, you can use random to change up things. Let's look at the second one. So this is the smoothed one. So what's happening is every time I press, it's going to glide to the next value. So here, how you can hear it going, doesn't sound so it's not as distinct. You're not going from one note to another, you're sliding. Now one useful thing you can do with this is, instead of sampling white noise or pink noise, we can actually sample the value of the note. So the note's just a voltage. So when we play a note, it slides between that and the next one. Now on my Volca, now it may be different for everyone's, but when I gate the voltage, it doesn't get just right. So for example, if you hear it, and then I press it again, here I went just up a bit. So it doesn't make it all the way all the time. So you can, if you press it a couple of times, it gets there. But one thing it is good at, if you slide your finger, it's more like a theremin now. So it's sliding. If we take that out, the same thing. You can hear all the individual notes. Put the smooth one in. Very theremin-like. So that's another use for the woggle. Now our split, we've got a couple of uses. Obviously we've used split before, I won't go through it, but you can take one voltage and get 2 copies of it, which is actually very useful. But there's an even more useful thing. Now one thing you can do at the source, and we do it, I've done it a couple of times to tune. If you put both oscillators together, you hear both oscillators. But if you listen, it's a bit grungy, it's a bit distorted. If that's what you want, that's great. But we can use our splitter as the opposite. We can actually use a splitter as a mixer. So if we, instead of those being the outputs, because you know the darker side, they're normally the outputs, and the lighter side is the input, we're going to switch it round. So we are now going to take 2 oscillators, the same as we did before, and instead of this being the input, it's now the output. So I'm going to take that, put that into the source of the first low pass gate. You can see that it's no longer grungy. I mean, the notes aren't very nice, but There you go. There's a bit of a detuned triangle. Not really as good as its famous cousin, the detuned saw. Maybe put a... down an octave. So it's a detuned saw. But we can, there's nothing saying we can't do chords or... There's a fifth. Fifth sounds quite nice. You can of course play it up an octave. So it's like almost like a Hammond organ. Think it done. Actually gives a bit more interesting sound to our triangle wave, but that's showing the splitter as a mixer. And none of this I've actually used the reverb. The reverb is, whilst fun, it doesn't really have too much of a use. You can try and modulate it with audio frequency, but it actually sounds a bit strange doing that. But you can get the weird and wonderful if you twist it all the way. So a bit of a detune, or a detuned octave through the reverb actually can sound quite nice. Anyway, that's hopefully just a quick look at modular. Had a few examples there. I mean, maybe you should go and try the old steel drum, but it shows you that each module is not just what it first appears. You can use it for various different things, and you can change the order. So you can change, instead of going there to there, there to there, there to there, you can change the order you want and change it around to actually make a completely different sound. That's the wonderful thing about modular. You get to choose where everything goes. So hopefully that was useful. Basically break out your own modular, have a little go, but yeah, enjoy. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you in the next one. If there is anything that people want to have any extra information or clarity about, for example, if you want to know more about the ring modulator, put it in the comments section, and I'll do another video sort of detailing that section a bit more. Okay, thanks for watching, and see you next time.